Committee will come to order. Today, the House Armed Services Committee meets to discuss the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan. We've been engaged in military action in Afghanistan for 14 years. The predictions that this would be a long conflict have proven accurate. While there have been setbacks in recent years, there's also cause for cautious optimism. The United States and its allies, especially the Afghan forces, have made some meaningful gains. A counterinsurgency is one of the toughest types of war a democracy can fight. While this conflict has been a difficult one, it's not impossible. And both our future security and the future of the Afghan people depend on our success. People of Afghanistan currently have, in my opinion, the best opportunity for a stable, relatively peaceful country that they have had in over 4 decades. Together with the cooperation of our allies and the Kabul government, we've built a 352,000-strong Afghan national security force. Although building a capable security force takes time, the ANSF is growing in ability and capability. But now is a critical moment. We must not repeat the mistakes of Iraq, where an early withdrawal that was based, in my view, on political rather than strategic calculations contributed to the rise of ISIL, where an enemy once devastated has reconstituted itself to pose an even bigger, more deadly threat. Although the operational outlook is very different than Iraq, Afghanistan could also become unstable should the United States end the mission before the Afghan forces are capable of providing their own security. We should not have, in my view, a time-based withdrawal from Afghanistan, and I hope that the President reconsiders the approach he has previously announced and listens to the request of President Ghani. Today, I hope to hear answers on some important questions, such as what objectives must be met to secure our gains, what are the key tactical and operational challenges facing the ANSF, and is our present and the Allied presence in Afghanistan adequate to meet those challenges? Finally, as Congress considers the President's counter-ISIL AUMF request, some of our questions are what implications that would have on ongoing and future operations against ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups in Afghanistan. And we are fortunate to have General Campbell with us to answer these and many other questions today, but before turning to him, I'd yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing. I want to thank General Campbell for being here and also for his service. I think he's the absolute right man for the job in Afghanistan. Certainly he's had a lot of experience there in a number of different roles during our conflict in Afghanistan. And I think there has been progress just since General Campbell took over. And I'll go ahead and give you all the credit for this. They finally arrived at a power-sharing arrangement within the Afghan government, signed a bilateral security agreement, and really laid the foundation, at least, to build off of that solid government and build a partnership. Unlike in Iraq, where we had, very, very strong difficulty getting any sort of bilateral security agreement that would allow us to stay. We've achieved that. As the chairman mentioned, President Ghani wants us to be there, and hopefully we can make that relationship work to help maintain the security. Ultimately, that is the big challenge. Afghanistan has got to be responsible for itself. They've got to be able to provide for their own security, and they've made great strides in doing that. As I'm sure the general will point out, they've taken over the primary security role throughout the country and have done okay. Not going to, sugarcoat that. It's still a very tough fight, but they've held their own. They've managed to keep the country relatively stable in light of the insurgency, and we need to build on that. Because ultimately, in Afghanistan and Iraq and all of these countries, Western military forces cannot impose security on another country. There's a fine line between helping them and appearing like a foreign occupying force. In this case, as we draw down and up the responsibility of the Afghan security forces, I think we've done it about right. Giving them that responsibility. But going forward, there will continue to be many, many challenges. The government still has corruption problems. The Taliban are still very active. The border issues with Pakistan have not been resolved. And we definitely have a security interest in that region. As I've said many times before in this committee, I wish we didn't. It's a very, very difficult place to deal with, but we do. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, these are groups that are part of the larger movement that threatens us. So we need a strong presence there that can help contain that. But again, hopefully one that builds towards self-sufficiency and the Afghan people being able to stand on their own, provide for their own security and their own governance. I look forward to hearing from the General today on how we're progressing on those goals and where we go from here. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Just on an administrative note, all members' offices were notified yesterday that for the purposes of this hearing, we are going to go in reverse order for those who were here at the gavel. Part of my thinking is we've had a number of members, newer members, who have sat through a long time on other hearings before you've gotten to answer questions. In addition, those of us who have been here a while have had the opportunity to ask a number of questions about Afghanistan, and so this is a good opportunity for newer members. So after we hear from General Campbell, we'll start go in reverse order for everyone who was here at the time of the gavel, and then, as we always do, recognize members in their order of appearance of coming into the committee room. So, General Campbell, again, thank you for making time to be with us. Without objection, your full written statement will be made part of the record, and the floor is yours.
Chairman Thornberry, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you really for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm honored to lead and represent the servicemen and women of United States Forces Afghanistan, and I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for your steadfast support of our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, and our civilians. And due to your leadership and commitment, they're the best trained, best equipped force our nation has ever deployed. And their outstanding performance bears testimony to your backing and the backing of the American people, so thank you very much. I'd like to pay tribute to our military families. They're the unsung heroes of the last 13-plus years of our conflict. In many ways, our frequent absences from home are harder on them than they are on us, and without their love and support and their strength, we could not succeed, so I thank the military families. I'd also like to recognize the over 2,200 servicemen and women who've been killed in action in Afghanistan and the over 20,000-plus who've been wounded. Each day, we strive to bring meaning to their sacrifices, and we honor their memories and their loved ones by continuing to build a secure and stable Afghanistan and by protecting our own homeland. Over 13 years have passed since the 9/11 attacks, and we haven't forgotten why we first came to Afghanistan and why we remain there. And since 2001, the extraordinary efforts and courage of our forces have ensured that another terrorist attack originating from Afghanistan and directed against the U.S. homeland has not occurred. Over 6 months have passed since I assumed command, and much has changed since then. Afghanistan, the region, the enemy, and our coalition have undergone many tremendous transitions, and most of these have been very positive. I'd like to emphasize a few of these today in order to place our current campaign in context and to really reaffirm the conditions that exist for us to achieve an enduring peace and potential strategic win for Afghanistan. And in September, Afghanistan completed the first peaceful, democratic transition in its history. And this was after a very prolonged campaign. And this transition was a monumental achievement. It represented the Afghans' commitment to a democratic and open society. The difference between the new National Unity Government and its predecessors is night and day. President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah have embraced the international community, our coalition, and the Afghan National Defense Security Forces, or the ANSAF. Our partnership is strong. We now have a ratified bilateral security agreement, and sir, I would just tell you a lot of people worked very, very hard for that, and a NATO status of the forces agreement, which grant us necessary authorities to continue our mission. Dynamics within the region continue to evolve as well. President Ghani has made regional engagement a top priority in order to address shared security and economic interests. Nowhere is this more evident than in Pakistan and Afghan relations. The Pakistani Taliban's murderous attack in Peshawar on 16 December may prove to be their 9/11 and really a game changer for the region. Most senior Pakistani officials recognize that they can no longer separate good terrorists from bad terrorists. And in the last few months, I've witnessed firsthand substantive improvement in their interactions between Afghan and Pakistani militaries. They're now talking. General Raheel, the Pakistan Army Chief of Staff, remarked during his recent trip to Kabul, "The enemies of Afghanistan are the enemies of Pakistan." And this is a constructive admission. and we're doing everything we can to promote their closer cooperation. And while we must temper our expectations, I remain optimistic that both countries are working towards a more productive relationship. The enemy remains in a state of flux, too. The Taliban failed to achieve any of their stated goals in 2014. They failed to disrupt the elections. They failed to undermine the political transition. And they failed to prevent the Afghan government from signing a long-term security agreement with both NATO and the United States. On the battlefield, they achieved no enduring gains. Mullah Omar hasn't been seen in years. The Taliban senior leadership is in disarray. Constantly pressured by the ANSAF, suffering from dissension within their own ranks, and lacking popular support, they've turned to high-profile terrorist attacks, particularly against soft targets inside of Kabul. In a desperate attempt to remain relevant, they're failing to win over the Afghan population. With the coalition off the battlefield, they're primarily killing their fellow Afghans and Muslims, and they're murdering innocent civilians. And it's time now for them to lay down their arms and heed President Ghani's call to help rebuild the Afghan nation. The possible rise of Daesh, or ISIL, is also a new development. Thus far, we believe that the Daesh presence in Afghanistan represents more of a rebranding of some of the marginalized Taliban. But we're still taking this potential threat with its dangerous rhetoric and ideology very, very seriously. And we're working very closely with the ANSAF to evaluate and understand the dynamic nature of this fledgling network. The potential emergence of Daesh represents an additional opportunity to bring both Afghanistan and Pakistanis together to confront this common threat. We will continue to engage leaders from both countries on ways we can collaborate to meet this challenge. We're all driven to prevent Daesh from establishing a meaningful foothold in Central Asia. United States forces Afghanistan and our coalition have undergone tremendous changes as well here in the last 6 months. On January 1st, United States forces Afghanistan formally ended its combat mission, Operation Enduring Freedom, and commenced its new mission, Operation Freedom Sentinel. We've also ended all detainee operations. Simultaneously, troops from 41 nations, which comprise the new NATO mission, Resolute Support, began executing their train, advise, and assist mission in order to develop the capabilities and long-term sustainability of the ANSAF. On January 1st, the ANSAF also assumed full security responsibilities. They're ready, and it's time. In their second fighting season in the lead, the ANSAF were challenged and tested, but they held their own against a very determined enemy. On the battlefield, the ANSAF fought tenaciously and demonstrated their increasing capabilities. Today, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan remains firmly in control of all 34 of its provincial capitals and all of its major cities. The Afghan Special Forces in particular have proven to be the most proficient in the entire region. They've constantly executed unilateral direct action missions using their own intelligence and using their own special mission wing helicopters to carry out long-range insertions in low illumination. These are remarkable capabilities for any military. For both the ANSAF and coalition, Afghanistan continues to be a dangerous place. Tragically, we lost a coalition soldier from Turkey last Thursday in a suicide attack inside of Kabul. ANSAF casualty rates increased in 2014, roughly 5 to 7% higher than they were in 2013. However, I think this must be viewed in light of the fact that their operational tempo was 4 times greater than it was in 2013, and that over 100,000 coalition forces were not on the battlefield. Even considering their higher casualty rates, the ANSAF attrition rates, which account for all losses to the force, have not impacted combat readiness too severely. Army and police recruiting has not been a problem. Afghan youths continue to join the ranks of the ANSAF, and service in the security forces is widely respected and viewed as an honorable, patriotic profession. The Afghan National Army remains the most trusted institution in the country. On balance, after watching the ANSAF respond to a variety of challenges over the past 6 months, I don't believe the insurgents represent an existential threat to the government. However, ANSAF still need a great deal of help in developing the systems and processes necessary to run a modern, professional Army and police force. They also need sustained support in addressing the capability gaps of aviation, intelligence, sustainment, and special operations. To address these gaps, our advisory mission and mentorship will continue to be vital. Our advisors are at the security ministries, at the Army Corps level, and police zones, and those remain our main efforts. Although clear challenges exist, I do believe that the ANSAF capabilities, their capacities, and the morale will be sufficient, backstopped by our advisory efforts. And this will provide for Afghanistan's long-term security by the end of the Resolute Support mission. President Ghani recently remarked that, and I quote, "compelled by tragedy and cemented by mutual sacrifice, the partnership between Afghanistan, NATO, and the United States has entered a new phase," end quote. And I believe we're at a very critical inflection point in our campaign. Many challenges remain before us as the new Afghan government continues to form. It's still finding its footing, and it must do so while contending with a security threat, corruption, and economic challenges. Yet, all of these changes, transitions over the last 6 months offer us really a tremendous opening and an opportunity. The Ghani administration offers us a strategic opportunity to develop a strategic partnership that will stabilize Afghanistan and then in turn provide and offer greater security for the region and ultimately the United States homeland. There is a new spirit of cooperation in Kabul, something we didn't have before. And I firmly believe that our concurrent counterterrorism and train, advise, and assist efforts will reinforce and deepen our strategic partnership and shape conditions for a favorable outcome to this conflict. We could offer no greater tribute to the American people, our fallen, and their loved ones than by maintaining our commitment to a long-term stability of Afghanistan and the enduring protection of our homeland. I'd like to direct the members' attention to the charts and a couple photographs to your right front that we've displayed. We've also provided paper copies for you to look at. You know, I'm often asked, what have we accomplished? What have we achieved? What is success? Has it been worth it? And I frequently share these statistics and images to underscore the tremendous progress that's taken place in Afghanistan in the last 13 plus years. Every measurable piece you take a look at, roadways, people that use the internet, number of people in school, females in school, the workforce, pretty incredible. It's unprecedented. The life expectancy increase of 21 years just in the last 13 years, that's unprecedented. A remarkable investment, a remarkable return on our investment. And few countries advanced so rapidly over the last several years. And that's success. And the coalition and our ANSAF created the conditions for that success. 741 million years, life years of Afghanistan people based on new life expectancy. Yet I want to underscore that we're underwriting this progress not just for the Afghans, but for the American people. And the Afghan stability and security contributes to our own. The next two will be pictures of where we were in 2001 and where we are in 2014. The first one shows inside of Kabul, then, and on the bottom now, that's at Maiwan Circle, and then Kabul at day, or Kabul at night, I'm sorry. 5th fastest growing city in the country. A remarkable difference. We've undercut the terrorist appeal, which feeds on desperation and instability. The hard work and significant sacrifices of countless U.S. and coalition military personnel and civilians over the last 13 plus years has created the conditions where Afghans can now take the responsibility for their own security and governance. The Afghans welcome the opportunity to shape their destiny, but they will still desire and need our assistance. We're supporting the emergence of a secure, prosperous Afghanistan that desires to be and can be our reliable strategic partner, and one that will never again allow terrorists to use its territory to plan and launch attacks against us. President Ghani has asked for additional flexibility in the NATO and U.S. mission to account for the fact that his government remains in transition. He acknowledges that while the ANSAF are better equipped and trained than ever, work remains to build their bureaucratic processes and systems. Additionally, he believes that a sustained U.S. and NATO commitment provides vital stability to the country as the new government solidifies, a tremendous psychological boost to the Afghan people. We will continuously assess the progress of Resolute Support, and United States Forces Afghanistan is currently involved in a comprehensive winter review of our campaign. And this review is taking a look at all of our lines of effort, not just the military, and I have provided various options and recommendations for adjusting our force posture through my chain of command. One issue is determining how long we should stay and can stay engaged at the regional level before we concentrate inside of Kabul. Once again, I express my profound gratitude to the committee members for your unfailing support of our mission and our troops in Afghanistan. I'm humbled and privileged to lead the men and women of their caliber and courage, and every day they're making all of us proud. And I ask that again, sir, as you said, that my written statement submitted earlier be taken for record. I do look forward to your questions, and I notice that the first 2 rows are filled, sir, so I look forward to that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, General. And I'd just say I appreciate the data that you brought to us. Some of this is surprising to me, and some of the information about the attitudes of the Afghan people, I think, are helpful to us, are particularly helpful to us. I think Mr. Smith and I are going to withhold our questions at the moment. I would request if we could put the posters down just unless members have questions about it, just to not block folks' view. And I would yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General, I also really appreciated your comments and want to echo what you said about our men and women in uniform and their families and the sacrifices they've made. I think it's important at every opportunity to remember them. I had a question about a comment that Secretary Carter made yesterday, and I want to get your take on it. Secretary Carter told the Senate Armed Services Committee that withdrawal from Afghanistan would be condition-based. It seemed to me that hinted that maybe there was no firm deadline for withdrawal, and my understanding has been that there has been an articulated plan by the President to have troop drawdowns by the end of 2016. So my question for you is, do you think that extending withdrawal past 2016 would help you better accomplish your goals on the ground?
Sir, thank you for the question, and I did see the Secretary's comments. So I've really provided options that stay within the framework of what the President put out there, and it does show the current plan is 9,800 U.S. going down to 5,500 by the end of December of 15, going down to between 1,000 and 1,500 by the end of 16. The options I presented forward do not go past 16. They are all providing flexibility within 15 and 16, sir.
Not to put you in a difficult position relative to stated goals by the President, but it's helpful for us to get your perspective as the commander on the ground. You showed tremendous progress here, which we, I think, all celebrate and want to see that continue and be in a position to be sustained after our mission there is complete. What would be your level of confidence that you can achieve that by the end of 2016?
So honestly, to be very candid, and I owe you my best military advice as I do to my chain of command. I don't know what we can accomplish in the summer fighting season of 15 at the train advised level that we're currently conducting. We just started the new Resolute Support mission on 1 January. What I really wanted to make sure we could do is get through a full, what we call a fighting season, April through the late September timeframe, focused on train, advise, and assist, plus with our CT mission. And if we look at a downsize of the 5,500, that potentially could take our eye off of focus on train, advise, and assist when we really need it. So that's why the flexibility, I think, is very, very important. You know, as a commander on the ground, we take a look at all the different conditions that are out there. We continuously make assessments taking into account the enemy situation, the friendly forces, how they're doing, the people, the different regions. And so all of those will go in as I continue to make assessments and provide that. But I really do need to understand and see what we can do with these new entities, what we call TACs, Train, Advise, Assist Commands, that we have in our spokes in Gambari and Jalalabad out in the east, and Kandahar in the south, Herat in the west, and Mazar Sharif in the north. This is a new dynamic. We haven't been at that level before. My initial assessment right now is they continue to work very well, and the Afghans really do, over the last 13 plus years have continued to develop. This is my third time in Afghanistan. My last time was as the Regional Command East Commander, 101st, 2010, 2011. Visited a couple times in between 11 and when I took over this summer. But the difference from back in 10 and 11 to where we are today is just night and day. It's incredible. The Afghan security forces continue to progress. They have an operation ongoing now. I won't go into great detail because it is an ongoing operation in northern Helmand, but this was an operation that was entirely planned and led from the Afghan perspective. I took back briefs on it about 3 weeks ago when I was down in Helmand. This is a 3-corps operation. The main effort is the 215th in Helmand. It has supporting efforts from the 205th in Kandahar, the 207th at Herat. I've never seen an Afghan operation that was that complex. Back briefed to me and the senior leadership inside of Afghanistan and the police and the Army side, and the integration between all the Afghan security pillars, the police, the Army, their intelligence, was pretty remarkable. And so I think they continue to get better and better. I think I'd be able to answer that better after we get through this fighting season to really see how the train advise assist goes. But I do believe that the flexibility that we've asked for in several different options and that we've put forward will provide us a better opportunity to take advantage of things that have changed over the last 6 months. President Ghani and his embracing of the international community, the relationship between Pakistan, some changes in leadership in the Afghan security forces, and I really do think that leadership and then holding people accountable really makes a difference.
Thank you, General. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the change in format. I'll be sure to add you to the Christmas card list. Thank you for that. Thank you, General, for being here. With respect to the AUMF, if Congress were to pass the proposed AUMF, could you provide us with examples of what you could and could not do within that?
Thanks for the question, sir. I mean, I have not read the entire AUMF. I could tell you from looking at it briefly that what that would provide, I mean, the authorities I have today and the resources I have today, I can continue to work hard at the CT mission and the Train Advise Assist mission that I have. With the AUMF, the way I understand it now, with no geographical boundaries, I think I still would be able to prosecute what I need to for today. After 2015, where my authorities may change, and I'd have to go back and relook that hard. But sir, today, I would tell you I have no issues, as I think General Austin said from CENTCOM yesterday with that.
Have detention policies at all changed post 1 January?
Sir, absolutely. I do not have the authority to detain the insurgents, so all detainees that we would have had, they've been turned over to Afghanistan or other countries. I have no detention facilities inside of Afghanistan.
Thank you. One of the things we've talked about extensively is risk. Can you talk to us, and you mentioned in your testimony that it wouldn't be affected too severely, but could you add some more color to the discussion of risk associated with the proposed drawdown?
So risk, takes in a lot of different factors. The risk to the coalition of U.S. forces, the risk to the Afghan security forces. I think, again, any commander on the ground would like to have more resources, more people. We continue to work hard through that. As I make the assessment today and take a look at many of the things as we've drawn down, I don't say withdrawal, but we're in a continuous transition. And I think for the next 2 years plus, it'll be a continued transition. We have to adapt to those transitions. But as you transition, you lose people, which provides security. Most of my force protection and security is by, with, and through the Afghans as we consolidate. We've gone from 300 plus COPS, combat outposts and forward operating bases to less than 25 today. So that increases the risk in some areas to force protection, to security. As you continue to transition forces, you lose some resources. So the number of aircraft, the number of ISR platforms, all those things goes into the calculus as I take a look at the risk assessment, both to risk to mission and to risk to force. And again, as I looked at flexibility, President Ghani asked for flexibility. As I looked at that, I did take into account all those to try to mitigate risk to force and risk to mission as we move forward.
Can you give us some examples, and I know it could be speculative, but could you give us some examples of things that President Ghani may discuss when he addresses Congress later this month?
First off, sir, with President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah, the senior, the CEO, I mean, it is really a new dynamic. And I've had to deal with President Karzai when I first got there and in times before. And I think the American people, all the people need to understand that every time President Ghani or Dr. Abdullah address a crowd, they thank the international community, they thank the U.S. in particular, they pick the U.S. out. They thank them for the support. They thank the families for the sacrifices of their sons and daughters. You never would have heard that before. So it is a completely different atmosphere. I think the President will talk to all of you about that. I think he's quite proud of that. He's quite proud that he's taken on his leadership role as a commander-in-chief. He's visited training sites. He's visited military hospitals. He engages with the Corps commanders. I mean, I attend their national security conferences. I am able to talk to him about different security issues at any time. I think he'd tell you he spends probably 40% on security, 40% on the economics and where they need to go. But I think he'll really talk about where Afghanistan has come over the last 13 years, where its security forces are, where it would not be without the help of the great coalition and the U.S. in particular, not only for the men and women that have made sacrifices for our families, but also for the economic impact that the U.S. provided, along with many other donor nations. I think he may talk a little bit about how he sees the future and how he's going to get after corruption, and how he'll continue to attack that, and how he's going to broaden the perspective and deal in terms of a regional aspect, how he's engaged with Pakistan, India, China, Saudi Arabia, the entire region, and how he needs to do that both from an economic perspective but also from a security perspective. I think he's looking forward to it, and I think all of you will find that he'll be very engaging, and his message will be one of thanks, but also that he has a great vision for the future of Afghanistan.
Thank you for your continued service, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You, Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I'd like to talk about a couple other things. Let's talk about readiness of the forces. This has been a generation that could have gone into their military career in 1990 and now be retired and have been or have seen battle for the last 24 years. So here in Congress, we worry about things like sequestration, worry about readiness of force, and worry about one-to-one ratios of young men and women being over there and for a year and being back here for a year, or 6 months in a year, or something of that nature. Can you give us an idea of the readiness of force today as compared to maybe 4 or 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago?
So I can talk better and give you a perspective on the readiness of the forces that I get from the services, as they are service providers. A little bit different perspective when I was the Vice Chief of the Army before I went over there 6 months ago. But all the forces that I get in Afghanistan, particularly from the U.S., are trained at the highest level, and they're focused on their mission in Afghanistan. So no issue with that. And I think all the services prioritize their deploying forces first to ensure that they get that necessary training, because they'll be putting their lives on the line. On the sequestration, I would just tell you that it was 6 months ago when I was a vice, and I continue to talk to senior leadership from all the services that with sequestration, that would devastate the services and their ability to provide the same type of forces that I get today. You know, my son is a sergeant in the Army. He's been to Afghanistan twice. He served in Ghazni. He served in Jalalabad. He was in the 82nd Airborne. He's currently in the 101st. And I worry about, both as a father and then as a commander, the ability to make sure that we continue to provide the very best training and all the resources and things that go with that for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and our civilians that deploy. And sequestration would dampen that and would elevate the risk, absolutely.
Thank you, and I think that you've got a lot of committed people here that believe that too. Secondly, when we talk about detainees and you say that you turn them over to security forces or to Afghan, what happens from there? Is there some sort of a prosecution? Is there some sort of judicial action there, or are they just detained, or are they released?
So it's probably all of the above, quite frankly. But with the detainees that we had, there was a long process that went through to get assurances from either countries that they were sent to, or to Afghanistan as well, to make sure that the right assurance was put in place, that they would be tried if they had to go through that process, that they would be treated humanely. And so that was carefully taken a look at all of the different detainees that were released from U.S. control, coalition control. Again, no longer do we have detention facilities. Inside of the Afghan system, that continues to grow. The Parwan, up at Parwan, outside of Bagram, is probably the very best detention facility in all of Afghanistan. Continues to be I think, the gold standard that they have there. They're in the process right now, based on direction from President Ghani, to move really the national threat detainees to Parwan and get them out of places that are overcrowded, like down in Kandahar or Polisharki inside of Kabul, to make sure they can lessen that they have the right security so that they're not freed without going through the proper trials. And so I think they continue to work that very hard. But Parwan is a gold standard. It has the right prosecution efforts, has the right folks, the judges all kind of contained in one unit there. And we do have a very small train and advice assist cell that will continue to help build that capability for them.
Thank you, General. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I was impressed by what I saw in the Codell 2 weeks ago with the progress that you've made. And I share the Chairman's view of the situation in Iraq, where I think that all the progress that we made, or much of the progress we made during the surge, has now been squandered by withdrawing too quickly and not providing the ongoing political and diplomatic support that we frankly knew was necessary, that Ambassador Crocker and General Petraeus called for at the end of the surge. So I'm interested to hear from you what specifically you were doing differently in Afghanistan this time around. And I'll add that I have the highest respect for President Ghani, but I'm not interested in hearing what's different about our partner, because I think that after you invest trillions of dollars of our national treasure, after you invest thousands of lives, we shouldn't leave the eventual success of our mission up to the whims of our partner. So I'm interested in what you and the U.S. effort there is doing differently from Iraq.
Sure, thanks for the question, and again, thank you for visiting our troops here. I apologize for not being there. I was back here doing the SAS testimony as you were forward. So I would think, again, I spent 19 months in Iraq as a one-star back in 2006, 2007 during the surge inside of Baghdad. And I think the fundamental difference for me is really the Afghan security forces and their leadership and their determination to make sure, and they see the news, they see the media, they understand what's going on with Iraq, and they have personally told me, many of the senior leadership, that they will not let happen to Afghanistan what happened to Iraq. You know, during the political instability last fall, many people thought that they would divide among the ethnic fractures, which is what happened inside of Iraq. In Afghanistan, they did not do that, despite a lot of talk. In fact, they solidified around that and took that as a point of pride to make sure that they didn't fracture and that they were above that and that they were a national force, and they take great pride in doing that. I think the training that I've seen, for the most part, is all Afghan-led training. I was out in the 207th Corps in Herat a couple weeks ago, and kind of unannounced, I said, let's ask the Corps Commander, let's go look at some training. He took me to medical training, to some of their marksmanship training. I saw them clearing buildings. Again, this was unannounced.
General, with all due respect, that's fantastic news, but that's what the Afghans are doing, and that's how the Afghans are doing things differently than the Iraqis. But what are we doing to ensure that? I mean, President Ghani is a great partner today. He could, you know, God willing this won't happen, but he could be gone tomorrow. So what sort of backstops are we putting in place to ensure that if this does start to head south for any reason, we can recover and we won't end up with a situation like we had with Prime Minister Maliki in Iraq? Sure,
no, thanks. And I think really for me, the continued train, advise, and assist at the ministry level and what we're doing with the MOD and the MOI in all levels of both those organizations that control the Army, that control the police. We're working on their transparency, accountability, oversight. We're working on their planning, programming, and budgeting. We're working on their sustainment. We're working on their planning capability. We're working on their strategic communications, working on their intelligence. These are all essential functions that we think they need to continue to have, you know, as we come out of there. And I think our continued work in those areas at the ministry levels will continue to help that. The other piece is that they are looking hard at ensuring that they are a professional Army and a professional police. And they have leadership courses that continue to go on. They pick bright leaders at all different ranks and bring them into special courses on leadership, and they understand that leadership makes a difference. And I think different from what you saw in Iraq.
Are you seeing the State Department devote the level of resources needed to continue this mentorship and support on their diplomatic side of the house?
Yeah, we have a great relationship with Ambassador McKinley and the folks, you know, we're connected right next to the embassy there. They don't do the MOD and MOI, but they're engaged in all the other ministries. and the NGOs here, and I do think that they're very dedicated and they continue to work very hard. Again, all the coalition, all the State Department of all the different embassies are all there because they're passionate about where Afghanistan can go in the future. They're excited about the future of Afghanistan. I think everybody's working very hard. And the fact that what's happened in Iraq has been in the news just gives them more determination to say this ain't going to happen here.
And just my last question, just to ensure that we are maintaining our commitment to the long-term stability of Afghanistan, as you said in your earlier in your spoken testimony, what is the ongoing financial commitment of the United States to make that happen?
So we're looking very, very hard at how we continue to be more efficient and how we can reduce that. But it's about, for 15, about $4.1 billion. And looking at FY16, I think I've got that down to about $3.8 billion because of some efficiencies that we've garnered both in their forces and how we operate. And we'll continue to look at that very, very hard. But they are very dependent upon the U.S. and all the other donor nations to have this Army and police they have, absolutely.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Campbell, for your service and leadership. I, too, had the privilege to participate in the CODEL, chaired by our subcommittee chair, Joe Wilson, and I joined Congressman Moulton and Congressman Ashford on the trip. It was great to visit some of the troops deployed from my district. So my question is, in late February, the DoD announced the 3 units to deploy as the upcoming rotation of forces in Afghanistan, and one of those units is the 2nd Brigade from the 10th Mountain Division, which I have the privilege of representing, which is located at Fort Drum, as you know. The 10th Mountain has supported operations in Afghanistan since 2001. It's the most deployed unit in the U.S. Army since 9/11 to both Iraq and Afghanistan. So, based upon my visit and our privilege of meeting with President Ghani and the upcoming deployment of soldiers in my district that I represent, I'd like to know from you your assessment of the risks to the security situation as we draw down in Afghanistan and how that will impact our future operations against the Taliban.
Ma'am, again, thank you for visiting and thank you for the question. I do have Colonel Pat Frank with me over here that commanded 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain, was down in the southern part of Afghanistan back in 2010, 2011, and we are very appreciative of the 10th Mountain support. You know, what I would tell you is that they'll come in and they'll work the train, advise, and assist. Force protection is our #1 priority. The President has told me that's his #1 priority. I look at that every single day. We continuously monitor the threat streams, both inside of Kabul and at all of our combat outposts and our TACs. Every single day we're looking at ways on how we mitigate that threat. You know, but frankly, it will continue to be a very dangerous environment. There will be insurgents that want to kill our soldiers. You know, we shouldn't put that aside. That is out there every single day. So every day, what we can't do is become complacent. We tell our soldiers, you know, that in a 9-month, a 12-month rotation that they have there, they will have an opportunity to make a difference. It may only be 15 seconds where they make that difference in their entire tour when it comes in terms of force protection. The issue is they don't get to pick when that 15 seconds is, so they have to be ready all the time. And I think the services do a great job, and our non-commissioned officers do a great job of preparing our soldiers to understand the risk that will become when they do deploy. And again, many of our soldiers have been there numerous times. They understand that. It is changing, and we continue to take a hard look at that. The green on blue incidents that have been out in the news here the last several years, where we have Afghan soldiers or police attack coalition or attack U.S. members, that continues to get much less as we've mitigated that through our own training with different programs to provide overwatch. The Afghans have done a much better job on vetting both soldiers and police and how they do their training. So that has gone way down, and we feel, you know, we can't get complacent. We'll continue to look at that. But believe me, ma'am, the force protection is upmost in our mind, and we work that very hard in our pre-deployment training. And once they get in the country, they're continually reminded and go through processes to make sure that they don't become complacent.
I wanted to ask one follow-up. In our discussions with President Ghani, we talked about the threat of ISIS and the potential for ISIS to grow in Afghanistan and their most recent recruiting efforts. Does that concern you? Can you talk about what those challenges are going to be, not just in the short term, but the long term?
Again, thank you for the question. You know, it is a potential threat, is how President Ghani has used that. A concern to him, so it is a concern to me. We take a hard look at that. We've engaged with our Afghan security partners in making sure we're seeing what they see. We understand how they see it. with all the other intelligence organizations that we have inside of Afghanistan. We come together to discuss that potential threat. I would tell you right now, we have seen some recruiting in different parts of the country. We have seen some night letter drops. We have not seen it operationalized. We have not seen a lot of money come in. We have not seen those forces gather and prosecute targets at all. But again, it is a potential threat for Afghanistan and Pakistan. So as I said in my opening comments, it is an area where I think Afghanistan and Pakistan can continue to work together to go after a potential threat that has already displayed, how horrendous they will be. And the Afghan security institutions and the Army and the police have told me they will not let that happen. And the dynamics inside of Afghanistan are different than Iraq. With the Sunni prosecution, how that's been Iraq, the political piece. This is not just, it didn't just happen here the last several months. This has been building up for years and years in Syria and Iraq, and in Afghanistan, it's a different dynamic with the culture that you have there as well. And but we will see it, and we'll continue to monitor it and make sure that we have a strategy that can attack it on a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term.
Thank you.
Mr. Ashford.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Campbell. I can tell you that when we went to see General Ghani, he was so terribly appreciative of your efforts and all the efforts of our military and our support personnel. It was absolutely incredible. I was also happy to hear from President Ghani of his relationship with the University of Nebraska at Omaha in the Tom Gutierrez and the Afghan Studies program, which has been going on there for over 30 years. So I was glad to hear that. And I want to thank Congressman Wilson as the chairman of our Emerging Threat Subcommittee for his leadership, and also my two colleagues who, it was an immensely important opportunity for me and I think our district to see what was going on. And we went to, obviously we went to Jordan and Iraq and to Afghanistan, so we got the entire picture in a way. Congressman Stefanik, I think, asked a critical question that I was left with is we have many fewer members of the armed services in Iraq and than we do in Afghanistan, and for historic reasons and for the reasons that you've discussed. Could I just ask you to comment just a little more on this situation? If the ISIS situation becomes more, it already is very dangerous, but where more troops from the American side are necessary, or whatever the eventuality may be, could you just comment a little bit more on that interrelationship? President Ghani did talk about what you suggest that they are observing, watching. He talked about his Pakistani his openings to Pakistan, his discussions with Pakistan, which seem very, very positive. But this threat in Syria and Iraq, which is growing, but we're containing to a certain degree, that it's the same Middle East area. So how do you, again, could you just comment a little more on that interrelationship? What if it becomes more difficult for the Iraqi forces to be successful in their country? Thank you.
So I can't comment on the Iraqi forces. I can comment on the Afghan forces. And again, the senior leadership of the Afghan police and army have told me on several occasions that they will not let what happened in Iraq happen in Afghanistan. They're very determined about that. Have gone out of their way to tell that to me. As that question has been raised in many different instances with them, and as they talk to their leadership, as they've talked to the president. The president brings this up though because he wants people to understand that the environment in Afghanistan continues to evolve. It is a dynamic environment, and he doesn't want his forces to become complacent. He wants them to understand that what happened in Syria and Iraq in this network in jump stages of growing to this network, and that it evolves very, very quickly. And so I think he just wants to make sure that his forces, his intelligence services are taking a look at everything and making sure that it doesn't get a foothold inside of Afghanistan and continues to spread. And he can be helped with this association with Pakistan because they have the same issues here. And I think that relationship and understanding that they have a common enemy that they can work toward together will help them. So I think that they're looking at this very hard. He gets several security updates a day, and the Daesh or the ISIL piece continues to be on his mind. But in the National Security Council meetings that I sit in, that he has all the senior cabinet folks in there, that is a point of discussion, most of them. but I think they view it as a potential threat and ensuring that they have a strategy as we move forward, and I think that'll continue to evolve over time.
Thank you, General. And I would yield back my time at this point. I had a question about Pakistan, but I'm sure it'll be asked and answered, so thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Zinke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, it's always good to see you again. I tell you, I sleep better at night knowing you're there. You know, as a former deputy commander and acting commander of Special Forces in Iraq, you know, I think we left Iraq too soon. I think when we left Iran or Iraq on a timeline rather than condition the ground, it affected the Sunnis. We disenfranchised them, I believe. We isolated the Kurds. We, to a degree, empowered a centralized government to be non-inclusive. And the result was a vacuum. And that vacuum, I think what we're seeing today, was filled by ISIS. And my concern is we don't repeat the same model in Afghanistan. I think the concern of the committee remains the same. Looking forward, what would you consider to be your 3 priority conditions? And what's that in strength to support that? And lastly, in my experience, having a detention center, at least a temporary detention center, gave us the ability to rapidly turn around sensitive site exploitation and do follow-on missions in a timely manner that made a difference in the ground. And not having the ability to have a detention center, at least a temporary detention center, to me would adversely affect your ability when you find a target to rapidly turn around and do follow-up missions. If you'd comment on that, whether in fact it does adversely affect your ability to turn around.
Sir, thanks for your service, and thank you for the questions as well. If I can answer the last one first and come back to the ISIL piece on the intelligence. So intelligence, as you know, drives operations, and that's what we really try to instill in our Afghan partners, that all their operations should be intelligence-based, and we continue to work that very hard. We do have a very good relationship with the MOI and the MOD and the NDS, which is their intel service. And so as they have the detainees, we work a relationship to make sure that we can partner with them, and the intelligence, the information they get from their detainees, we try to make sure that we can get that information as well, because it impacts our force protection, and we can also help guide them. They are building a fusion cell which combines the MOD, the MOI, and the NDS together, lessons that we've learned over years and years. They're stovepiped where they are now, and so you have MOI working off different pieces, MOD working off pieces, and NDS working off pieces. And what we're really trying to force is this sharing. They're testing this really with a pilot down in northern Helmand in this operation today, and we're seeing quite good success off of this as they do share all that intelligence and understand that it makes them a better capable force as they get this intelligence, turn it very quickly to drive to other targets. So I think our relationship over the last 13 plus years of working with them at the ministry levels now and at the core levels, we have a relationship to enable to make sure that we can help them with that intelligence. So I feel comfortable where we're at. Still got a lot of work to do with that. They don't have the same type of ISR or those platforms that provide us some of that. We share where we can, but we got to make sure we continue to build their capability. So we're working on how we build the intel capability. Intelligence is one of the 8 essential functions that we continue to build at all the ministry levels. My senior Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, the J2, Major General Scotty Barrier, was a CENTCOM J2 before this assignment. He really is the senior intel advisor that I have in country, and he works with both the MOI and MOD to build that intel capability. So I feel much better than where we were on building that, and I think that's going to help all of us in the end. On the ISIS piece, sir, on conditions, you know, I take a look every single day and assess different conditions. Time is one of those conditions. Number of people on the ground, both from a coalition perspective and from a Afghan security institution perspective, is another condition. So I think I take a look at all those. I really do want to take a look at what happens after this first full fighting season where the Afghans are really totally on their own. They've led it for the last 2 years, but this is the first time that they really are on their own, and we really are just in the train, advise, and assist, and don't have the resources to provide for them, and they are working very hard on their own capacity for close air support, intelligence in those areas. And so, you know, I can't give you a number that I would feel comfortable with right now. I think I need to let this play out. But I do believe that we are the best thing that we can do to hedge against Afghanistan not becoming an Iraq my number one priority would be to continue to train, advise, assist, and build their own capacity and their capability, both in close air support, both in their special operating forces, which increases their CT capability, and they want to be. And President Ghani has said many times, you know, he is a strategic partner and wants to continue to build the Afghan CT capability. So down the road, they have that, and we'll continue to work with them on that.
And I'll follow up on the detention centers. Do we have the ability, if you get a high priority target, do we have the ability to be present during those initial interrogations and interviews, or is it separate?
The gentleman's time has expired. Is there a one-sentence answer, General?
So I'd rather cover that with you in a closed session, sir, and I can give you a little bit more detail on that.
All right, sir. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General. It's so good to hear some good news. So thank you for your report. One thing that you stated is that the terrorist appeal has been undercut in Afghanistan. That's something that we need to figure out. How do we bring that reality into other places in the region? But my question focuses on local law enforcement. I'm aware that recently Prime Minister Ghani has changed some of the leaders of the local police forces. And I was wondering, what is the interaction between military and law enforcement? My husband happens to be law enforcement, and I know how important it is to have that close relationship. It's often those closest to us that can have the greatest impact on our behaviors. So is the military involved in working with local law enforcement? And do you see that as a positive development with the changes in law enforcement recently in Kabul? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. You know, in Afghanistan, it really is, we talk about pillars and the security pillars, the police, the Army being two different pillars here. And what I tell people is when these pillars, they do cross-pillar coordination, they work together, the Army and the police, then they are much stronger and they can't be beat. And I attend a Saturday 3-4 hour session every Saturday, which we call the Senior Security Shura, and that has the senior members of MOD, the senior members of MOI, NDS, which is their intel arm, and then the National Security Advisor, Minister Atmar. And so the police and the Army interaction is daily, every single day. The police operate a little bit differently. They do have the law enforcement aspect. They continue to work through that. But in many places, they are the only security institution in the far reaches of Afghanistan. And so they are a threat to the insurgents. The Afghan local police, which are designed to provide security inside of the villages, are probably the most attacked. They have the least amount of training. They don't have the same weapons as the regular police or the Army. And so they do get attacked, but they do stand up and they do protect, and they are feared by the Taliban and the other insurgents because they are directly linked to the people inside the communities. But I think the linkage between the police and the Army is a strong one. They continue to work it. In the provinces, they have what they call OCCPs or OCCRs. These are institutions that the governors have that have police, Army, and the intel folks all together inside one, for lack of a better term, an operational command and control element at both the regional and then at the provincial level. And they provide interaction between the police and Army. They sit right next to each other in desks and work at, and then they interact with their higher headquarters, which also has police and Army. In my headquarters inside of Kabul, I have Afghan Army representatives, Afghan police, that sit right next to each other inside of my combined joint operations center as well. So that interaction is very good. And if I can just hit the intel piece or the terrorist appeal piece, what I would tell you is that less than 10% of the people in Afghanistan embrace the Taliban, and that number continues to go down. And a lot of that is because of the actions of the Taliban, and they understand that the civilian casualty piece, although reports said something like 75% are caused by the insurgents, you know, our records show potentially above 90% are caused by the terrorists, and the people are just frankly tired of this, and they want a better life. They want the exact same thing we want. They want to be able to send their kids to school. They want to be able to have a roof over their head. They want to have a job to provide for them, and so they understand that underneath this national unity government, 85% of the people want this government. They want it to do well, and they're tired of what the Taliban and what they represent. And so that's a big change from where we were just a couple years ago.
Well, thank you very much for that positive report. I want to correct myself, President Ghani, get his title correct. And let's hope that what you have accomplished in Afghanistan will continue and can be spread throughout the region. So thank you for your time, General, and your service.
Ms. Walorski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for being here. My question is, I think it's been fairly disconcerting, it has to me anyway, of how much information, when it comes to operational security, the President of the United States has given out and how we read it every day in the media. We learn about the withdrawal, the troop size. We learn, as the Taliban does at the same time, all kinds of unbelievable information. And I guess, and to kind of follow up on my colleague's comment, and I really don't want to ask you this for public disclosure, but I want to ask you for this either in writing or a classified briefing. I want to know the detailed Plan B. What are the flags and the signs that are going to trigger our re-engagement should this go awry? I really do want to know, because I want to know that we do have a plan. And I don't want to ask it in public for everybody in the world to listen, because it really does concern me. But I would ask for you to provide that in writing or a classified briefing. What are we looking for that's going to happen so we don't end up, again, with more loss of blood and life and engagement from America as we're looking at in Iraq? And then my other question is on this new AUMF with ISIL. As you understand your role, I had attended a briefing a couple of months ago, and somebody was here from the State Department, and we were talking about current rules of engagement, current AUMF as it pertains to Afghanistan with this train, advise, and assist mission. And my question specifically was, as we know ISIL is networking all over that part of the world, we know ISIL is looking around and recruiting in Afghanistan. So my question was, under this current operation you're under, was if ISIL is identified by American troops or Afghan National Security Forces in our train, advise, and assist mode that we're in, can we absolutely destroy ISIL when they're identified? And the answer from the State Department was, no, ma'am, they would not be considered a threat to the United States at that point. My comment was, I would consider the fact that we're at war with them and the mere existence of ISIL means we should destroy them. So in your role right now, what is your understanding in your current AUMF when ISIL is identified? Are they taken out because we're at war with them, or are they given a pass?
Ma'am, thanks for your question. We don't talk about rules of engagement, obviously, and the tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs that go along with that. I would just answer that and say that I'm comfortable with the authorities that I have today, that I can prosecute the mission, both from a CT perspective and from a train, advise, and assist perspective, and also protect the force that I have. But I can't go into the rules of engagement in this environment.
I understand. And again, I would like to have a conversation or some kind of follow-up that talks about that in the schedule
Absolutely, ma'am.
at some point. And then also with this new AUMF, what's the difference going to be in how you can engage ISIS now? Do you see further gains? You have more advantages in this new AUMF than you do now?
Ma'am, I haven't seen the final written document that's gone through it. I've glanced through pieces of it. I know that there's no geographical boundaries, which would help out in Afghanistan. I'd have to do a more detailed look at that. But again, for right now, I have the authorities that I need to be able to prosecute the CT and the train advise assist mission I have. I'd have to take a harder look at that, and I can come back to you on the AUMF and how that would impact 15, and then, more importantly for me, as we transition into 16 and beyond.
And then in relation to the size of the troop and the troop strength, 10,000, 5,000, 10,000, 5,000, compared to what you're doing right now, what additional kinds of missions and what additional kind of coverage do you have right now that you're going to lose? And if that's something that we can't talk about here either, I'd like to have a conversation about that. When we're talking about drawing down from 10,000 to 5,000, what are we actually losing there? And again, what steps are in between there that talk about, for our purposes, of the train assist and assist the Afghani forces, what does that mean? How much coverage then are the Afghan forces going to be having to do on their own? What does that mean as far as risk? I understand, probably can't talk about a lot of that here, but I really do want to follow up answers to those questions so that we know, as members of Congress who are going to be voting on this new AUMF, that there really is some kind of a plan. And we're not going to sit here again. I don't think anybody can take anybody's word for anything. We may have all the faith in the world in this new president, but we also see how these things change on a dime. And I think we owe the American public a chance to at least have seen, even in a classified setting, that there is a plan. So I appreciate it, and I look forward to your responses, either in writing or in a classified briefing. Thank you, sir. I yield back my time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I'd first like to thank you and those who serve and have served under you, including the Bulldog Brigade from Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, for the incredible job that you are doing and have done in Afghanistan. And I join my colleagues in just thanking you for this terrific performance, which goes beyond any claims that someone could make or anecdote, but actually by the numbers and by the pictures and what we can see and what my colleagues were able to see in their recent visit. And I agree with many of the comments made so far that I think there are many lessons that we can apply from your success, this country's success in Afghanistan, to our operations and objectives in Iraq. When it comes to the proposed AUMF that we're considering to combat ISIS, my understanding that the immediate goal is to stop ISIS and ultimately to degrade, defeat, and destroy ISIS. What is our goal in Afghanistan relative to the Taliban?
Sure, thanks. And I really do believe that, again, on the AUMF, I have to look at that harder and look forward to other questions and maybe a closed session, and we can talk through that on the resources that we have to be able to do that. So on the Taliban piece, what I would tell you is our goal really is to build the Afghan capacity both in their police and in their army to be able to have a secure, stable Afghanistan for the future. And the Taliban and their message, you know, is not having any traction with the Afghan people. And as I said in my opening comments, it really is time now for the Afghan Taliban to take a look at what they're trying to do and become part of the political process. President Ghani, in his inauguration speech, opened the door there for them to come back and really work hard on reconciliation, which could potentially be a game changer down the road. But you know, that has to work with Pakistan and where they go and where Afghanistan as they continue to build their Afghan security force capability. But I do believe that, you know, they want to get the Taliban to where they are part of the Afghan vision moving forward, and killing other Afghans is not part of that vision. And so they have to operate from a position of strength, and I think 352,000 Afghan security forces, another 30,000 Afghan local police give them that capability. And the Taliban now are looking around and saying, you know, the coalition forces, they've signed a BSA, a SOFA, they're going to continue to help and provide, train, assist, and advise. You know, what we've been trying to do here for the last, we got to cut this out, we got to come in. And so I think that's really where we're going with the Taliban, but it is because the Afghan security forces are going to drive this, not the coalition.
And to that point, I think we're seeing record casualties and losses from the Afghan security forces, and thankfully, and much to do, I think, with your leadership and the service of our men and women on the ground, diminished casualties from coalition forces. You have, or military commanders have asked for additional flexibility, something that I think makes a lot of sense and fully endorse, given the lessons that we learned from Iraq and are learning from Iraq. I'm assuming that flexibility includes the ability for airstrikes, raids against terrorists and those who seek to do us harm. What status, and to the degree that you can offer clarity in this, what will you have to see on the ground in that country to recommend that we no longer need that flexibility and that we can meet our, it was going to be in 2016, our goal of having normal embassy level of protection? Again, through numbers or as clearly as you can, describe what that condition will have to look like for you to make that recommendation.
Sure, thanks for the question. If I could address the casualty piece first and just tell you that, as I talked about in the opening statement, 5 to 7%, probably larger or more increase than 2013. But again, if you put it in context, it is about the operational tempo that both the police and the Army had, 4 times greater than they had in 2013. And again, 100,000 coalition were not out there. And so it was expected that casualties would rise. And, you know, one casualty is too much. But what we continue to focus on are 2 things. One is continue to improve the Afghan capability to reduce the diet of wounds and work on their CASEVAC, their medevac, their doctors, their combat medics, or lifesaver capability. So we're working that all very hard. That continues to progress. And then also the recruiting piece. They've got that much better. You know, they don't recruit all year round like all of our services do. They kind of stop during the summer and the fighting season. Now they've got processes in place to do it kind of year round, and so it doesn't ebb and flow like that. And really, the casualty piece is not really from the attrition rate is not just based on the casualties. In fact, the number one reason is leadership and making sure they have the right leadership as opposed to combat casualties. So what it would take for me, really, I think, to recommend that we would continue to transition and work a glide slope differently, would to make sure that the seams and the gaps that we've identified for a very long time, that we need to continue to work on the Afghan security forces and on their ministries, that we've gotten them to a level that they could have the processes that they need without us. So the areas of aviation, we continue to build up their aviation capability. Their close air support, the first thing I always get asked for is close air support. Well, we're building their close air support. And so when I get a request that says, hey, can you fly close air support, I've asked them first, do you have a quick reaction force out there? Have you fired your mortars? Have you fired your artillery? Have you taken your Mi-17s that have forward-firing machine guns on them? You have a few Mi-35s. Have you used those? So we try to get all those out there to make sure they're working through those processes. We are working MD-530, which is a little bird helicopter that has 250 cal machine guns on the sides. We'll continue to work that. They won't have much for the next fighting season, but that will continue to develop. And we're working on a fixed wing capability that provides them close air support in the future as well, an A-29 Super Toscano. So that'll continue to grow. But once we get the aviation support, once we get their intelligence, once we work on their sustainment, once we continue to build their special forces capability, I'd feel much better as we close the gap on those seams that we had out there.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bridenstine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, the President's stated policy is to take our strength from 10,800 troops in Afghanistan down to 5,000 troops by the end of 2015. In your best professional military judgment, is that the right end strength at the end of 2015?
So it's about 5,500, half of somewhere around 5,500 by the end of December. And again, the options that I provided, I think, provide flexibility both for President Ghani and as the commander on the ground to take a look at force protection and how to get after the train, advise, and assist.
In 2014, the Afghan security forces lost over 20,000 personnel to desertions and deaths. Does that concern you?
So the numbers, again, as I talked about, if you put it into context, then I think we are working processes and procedures to make sure that doesn't have a great impact. And as I said up front, it hasn't had a severe impact on their readiness. Any desertion, any casualty, of course, that would concern me. It concerns their leadership. It concerns the President. But I think, again, it is about having processes in place to bring those people on board, to keep them in. And it really isn't about the combat casualties. That's a fraction of it, but a lot of the desertion piece is on leadership and making sure that people are looking at them and saying, are they getting paid? Do they have the right living conditions?
In your judgment, is there a correlation between our drawdown, cutting our troops by half, and their desertions?
So I haven't looked at that hard, but my gut would tell me no.
Okay. On page 16 of your testimony, you discussed the Islamic State as the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. You suggest that ISIS is your priority, is one of your priority intelligence requirements. Can you share with this panel what's going on with ISIS in Afghanistan now that makes it a priority intelligence requirement?
Thanks for the question. So, PIR, or priority intelligence requirement, I have several of those. That's not my only PIR. And so as we took a look at and talking to President Ghani, as we kind of did a deep dive with all the security agencies and the intel agencies inside of Afghanistan to look at what they were doing, I said I need to learn more about this, and one way to do that is to make it a PIR for my intel folks. So as we go through a number of things that we take a look at, as we allocate resources from ISR platforms, other things, because it is a PIR, then it'll get more a better look at it and provide me more continued updates on that. That's why I did that, because again, concern for President Ghani, a concern for me, could grow very rapidly. Again, at this state, the term that's been out there is nascent. It is a nascent organization, but again, as we talked about, it grew very quickly in Iraq and Syria. They have the potential to jump over different stages that build a network, and we want to make sure that we're looking at that very hard. So making it PIR just gives me a little bit better visibility on it.
Press reports in early February indicate that Mullah Abdul Rauf was killed in Afghanistan in a drone strike. The Washington Post called Rauf a figure actively recruiting for ISIS in Afghanistan, specifically Helmand, where coalition troops withdrew in October. Can you confirm these reports? This was in the Washington Post.
Yes, sir. No, it's been a lot of the media. Mullah Rauf Qadim was designated as a deputy emir of Daesh or ISIL inside of Afghanistan, the emir of what they call a Khorasan, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, in that area. Was actually a TTP from Pakistan, so this was the guy that said, hey, I'm the deputy emir.
And before you, I've got 1 minute left, so I have a few more questions about this gentleman.
Answer's yes on the
Okay,
envelope.
okay, you're aware. So when you think about Rauf, he was a Taliban commander. He was detained at Gitmo, released. We turned him over to the Afghan detention facility where he escaped, and he became a recruiter for ISIS. Are you aware of all this?
So I'm aware he was from Gitmo, that he was underneath Afghan control. I don't know any details on the escape at all.
As we look at the NDAA coming forward here, we've got to make decisions about Gitmo and the NDAA. Does it concern you that our troops in Afghanistan are fighting the same enemy twice?
Sir, it concerns me that they're fighting any enemy. If it's once or twice, I'd have the same concern, absolutely. But
in your best military judgment, is closing Gitmo at this time, knowing that 30% of the people are going back into the war, is that good or bad judgment?
So that's a policy question. You know, I'm a military guy. I don't want to get drug into that policy. What I would tell you is what I want to make sure I have the ability to do is if people are going to come back into Afghanistan, that I have the ability to make sure I'm comfortable with the assurances that Afghanistan or whatever country makes when they release people and turn them over to another country, that I have the ability to make sure I understand what assurances we have that these people will not attack coalition forces again. So I want to make sure I'm tied into that as we move forward.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Veazey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask the General a couple of questions based on the popular opinion poll that he gave us here. And it was talking about Afghans expressing confidence in their new government. Do you have any sort of sense of how Afghans feel as far as confidence is concerned with Afghan capabilities post U.S. or U.S. or post U.S. drawdown?
So again, it's like anything else. I think they understand the capability that just having the coalition with them provides, and a lot of it is just giving them some confidence. As I've taken a look on close air support, I give you that as an example that I get asked a lot of times, I need close air support, I need close air support. What I tell the Afghans is don't plan your operation wholly dependent upon close air support. You have the capability. The Taliban doesn't have close air support. The Taliban doesn't have up-armored Humvees. The Taliban doesn't have D-30 howitzers. The Taliban doesn't have the weapons that you have. So a part of it is just leadership again, and then really having the confidence to take this fight to the enemy. But if you go out on the streets of Kabul and you engage with 85% or 80+% of the people, they would tell you they're thankful for the coalition, that they want the coalition around. And I think they're more comfortable if they have a coalition because it knows, one, from helping out the security forces, it also provides them the opportunity to engage, have jobs, that kind of thing. So I think they would tell you that they feel comfortable with a coalition presence.
Right, exactly. Well, what about with a U.S. drawdown? How would that be perceived out in the terror community? Like, how do you think that people in the terror community, whether it's the Taliban or even outside of the Taliban, outside of Afghanistan, how do they view the Afghan capability as far as being able to protect their own country?
Sure, thanks. I think, I'd go back, if I can answer the last one a little bit more in detail. There was, I think, at different points in time, a sense of abandonment if you talk to some Afghans, but for the most part, the security forces, as they get the message out and show the people of Afghanistan what they're capable of, then I think that increases their confidence that the Afghan security forces can handle this. So there was early on, I think, some abandonment type discussion going on. I have not seen that, quite frankly, in the last several months as the Afghan security forces continue to get better and better. I think on the terror community that you talked about, I think they were thinking that the coalition would be gone after 2014, and that they would wait that out. I think with the BSA and the SOFA now signed, they understand that for many, many years we'll have a continued commitment by the international community to remain in Afghanistan, both in some number, but also in the resources provided to Afghanistan. And again, I think that their time has come that they got to become part of the political process. They got to get back into to being part of Afghanistan. They can't have Afghans killing Afghans, Muslims killing Muslims, and I think it's a sign of strength that President Ghani, on his first day of office, signed the BSA and the SOFA, and the message that it sent to the terrorist community is, hey, we thought it was going to go away, and it's not.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, first of all, I want to commend you on your testimony, your years of service in combat, peace. Can't even add up all the deployments you've been through. So, and what I wanted to address is something that isn't here, and it's of concern to our NATO partners, maybe under the radar, and that's the situation of the poppy and the drugs and the corruption that, from a rational viewpoint, it affects Europe. How are we doing on, can you comment on the status of that and where it's going right now?
Sir, thanks for the question. There's been a lot of different reports on the cultivation of poppies and what the impact it has financially for the insurgents in the area. A lot of that coming out of the Helmand area. Media reports will say that has increased over the last couple of years as opposed to going down. Sure, it is a concern to President Ghani. He's talked about it. He's looking hard at a strategy on how he goes after that and deals with the people that produce it, that deals with the insurgents that use it for their gain. They've looked at different options down there. They do have quite a good record of a small task force that goes after and seizes different places and for lack of a better term, drug labs that produce what comes out of there. But quite frankly, it has not been enough, and the strategy there has not taken that away from the insurgents. That is not part of my TAA or part of my CT mission, so I can't comment further on that piece of it. But bottom line, it does provide fuel, financial assistance to the Taliban, and we have to take. And the government of Afghanistan is looking hard at a holistic look at how they can combat that.
Thank you. The relationship with Pakistan obviously has improved quite a bit, the military. The equipment, at one time we were always concerned about the equipment backlog going through Pakistan and everything else. Are we in pretty good shape right now on that? We had containers backed up to the sky, and just a quick update on that. Or
Sir, thanks for the question. I mean, the logistical community and what our nation has done with retrograde of equipment is phenomenal. I think, years down the road when people take a look at this and fully understand the amount of equipment that came out and how it came out, this is record setting. And so we're on glide path now. We hit those back, all the numbers we thought we needed to hit coming out of the mission to where we are today. We're on those numbers, so I feel very, very comfortable. It ebbs and flows on how we do that through Torcom, through down in the south, based on the relationship with Pakistan. But again, the relationship with Pakistan today in Afghanistan is the best I've seen it in all the times I've been over there. And a lot of that is because of General Raheel, Chief of the Army in Pakistan, and then President Ghani and their relation, how they come together. But the retrograde, I think, is on glide slope. I have no concerns there right now.
yeah, I was very, very happy to hear that. I want to switch gears real quick. Uzbekistan in the north. Landlocked country, obviously, I think they have to have good relations with Pakistan. Iran's a whole new ballgame, as you know. What's the relationship with Uzbekistan right now? I know at one time they were working on that bridge, or I think it was the train that was going down there. Is that still ongoing, or?
So I haven't seen a final piece where they've signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, or a MOA agreement. I know that President Ghani has personally reached out to all the countries in the region. He's visited many of them. I don't think in the last couple of months that he has visited Uzbekistan, but I know he's talked to the senior leadership there. They've talked about the rail. They've talked about the bridges. They've talked about sharing intelligence back and forth and how they can fight different insurgents. Really, a lot in the north is around criminal activity as opposed to, you know, the insurgent piece. There's arms trafficking, there's drug trafficking, those kind of things. So they're working together. He has sent senior members of his administration to different countries around. I can find out, but I know that I think several members of senior positions in Afghanistan have gone to visit Uzbekistan as well.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for your service. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for being here today. At a time of sequestration, when we are cutting our funding for U.S. forces here in the U.S. and looking at everything from shutting down commissaries on bases to adjusting retirement benefits for our forces, we are looking at future expenditures in Afghanistan. Now, I have concerns that we have sufficient oversight with how the Afghans are spending the money that we are providing them with the resource. And specifically, you had mentioned you know, their lack of self-sustaining capability, logistical capability. I'd like to look specifically at their ability to account for personnel. We talked about already the over 20,000 troop attrition in the Afghan forces that has been reported. You know, I rely on the Special Inspector General's for Afghanistan reconstructions reports as to what's going on there, and I see that there have been some real concerns. I mean, the numbers of Afghan military and police forces fluctuate significantly, sometimes from quarter to quarter by as much as 20,000 or 40,000 personnel. And I'm worried that we're spending this money. We're not spending as much on our own U.S. forces here. We're spending money there, but you know, those 40,000 troop fluctuations are those best case scenario and accounting error. Those folks were never there, or they quit, or were we paying for folks that were never there, ghost soldiers as you were, that were on the books. So can you talk a little bit about how we are providing oversight for the Afghans and help to them to figure out how they can get a handle on their forces and how they're spending this money that we're providing?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your service as well. That's always a very, very tough, complex thing to get your hands around people in our own Army, as you know. We have a hard time sometimes figuring out exactly who's present for duty, who's not. Many of the figures I think you've seen in the last several days on numbers, you know, first off, we need to make sure that SIGAR and members of Congress have total transparency on everything that we're doing inside of Afghanistan, and I want to make sure, and we are committed to provide SIGAR and, again, Congress everything they need to do that. Some of the things are classified, and back in August timeframe, so this is not a new story, but back in August when I got there, I asked that we take a holistic look at all the information that was going out to not only the SIGAR, but to the press and everybody else. And I said anything that is readiness data, and sometimes numbers of people and how you take a look at that could be construed as readiness data. But I said anything that is readiness data for the Afghans needs to be classified. We just can't put that out for the Afghans' good, and also because we're wholly dependent upon the Afghans now for our own force protection. It became more so that I needed to have their readiness data classified. The U.S. Army's readiness data is classified. All of our services data is classified, as you know. So that decision was made in August. I reaffirmed with President Ghani. In fact, he approached me about having that kind of data classified. And again, here in the last probably 2 weeks or so, I went back to him and said, I want to make sure you're comfortable because I'm getting asked a lot of questions on this. He was absolutely adamant that Afghan data that pertained to readiness data was classified. So I feel very comfortable where we're at. And I have not, as has been reported in some media, changed my mind. I have not. Readiness data remains classified. Now, in the numbers of people, and again, the last report that came out a couple days ago from SIGAR, I think what happened there, and there's, again, I want to make sure SIGAR has everything they need to do their job, and Congress has that information as well. But I think numbers reported and numbers where you get that information comes from many different sources. And there is a report called the 1230 report that Congress has dictated that I give, and that is sort of that's the baseline, and that's where the numbers need to come from. And I think SIGAR understands that as well. But I think some of the reports you saw and where the discrepancy were like quarterly reports, and they may not have even come from my headquarters, but they came from maybe lower headquarters where members of potentially SIGAR, went down to a lower headquarters and said, hey, what are your numbers? And so we have to do a much better job at my headquarters to make sure that we have processes in place that we can provide the right data at the right time, but we have to have a better procedure to do that. And we're working on that. I just signed a standard operating procedure to consolidate how we work that. We have over 50, probably 62 different audits going on inside of Afghanistan, from SIGAR to AAA to DOD-IG, 60 plus. And so as we've transitioned and brought our numbers down, I don't have the people in country to do all of that. I'm dependent upon reach back or other ways, and we've got to come up with a way to be able to figure out how we provide audit data, but at the same time continue to transition. And I don't have that capability, and I have to raise that with my own leadership as we go forward. But the numbers that I think you saw the last couple of days, I think there's a miscommunication. When I learned through the New York Times, not through SIGAR, that these numbers are going to be replaced, I contacted John Sopko at SIGAR and said, hey, we need to take a hard look at this data you're getting ready to release. I don't think it's right. So I alerted them to that. They stopped the release of that piece. And again, we're looking hard at how we can continue to work, making sure everybody gets the right data. Hopefully that got to your question, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for being here. If there's one thing we've learned over the last several months, it is that the people of a country have to be willing to hold that country, and I'm speaking specifically of Iraq. Afghanistan, obviously a very different country. I think that from the context of the American citizen, maybe the way it's talked about, the perception is it's all one and the same issue, if you will. And I do think that we need to do a better job of getting that message out when we do have the victories, because all America is hearing right now is the bad that's happening in the Middle East. So thank you for your service. I want to talk with you about one of the issues that you talked about a couple of times, close air support. Obviously, in order for Afghanistan to be a success, they have to be able to hold that country from the Taliban and other terrorist organizations when we are hopefully completely out of there. The Afghanistan Air Force, the A-29 light air support mission right now is currently, they're being trained at Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta. If you could just speak to that element, how critical it is, the air support and the Afghanistans being able to carry out their own air support long term, and then how many A-29s do you expect we should be prepared to provide for the Afghanistan Air Force?
Sure, thanks for the question. And again, we're very thankful in Georgia that they have that capability to provide the training for the A-29s. It is a very long process. You know, looking in hindsight, I wish we would have started that years ago and we'd have that capability now, but we are where we are, and I think what's happening there, training the pilots, training the maintainers for this fixed wing close air support capability is critical for Afghanistan and their air forces as they move to the future. You know, quite frankly, we can't get it quick enough for them. The current program has about 20 aircraft over the next 3 years that will come to Afghanistan. We won't have any for this fighting season 15. We'll get some at the end of the year, a couple more before start of fighting season 16, but most will come out in 17 and then in 18. So that's another reason we need to continue to have this train, advise, and assist for the next several years on working at least on the Air Force piece. But it is a great, great capability. They're looking forward to it. And I think it will give them, and the people in that region will understand that the Afghans have this great close air support capability. We're working other ways to work that here in the near term with forward-firing machine guns on their Mi-17s, with MD-530, this little bird I talked about. And again, they do have indirect fire, mortars, 120 mortars, the D-30 howitzers that will continue to work with them on different ways to improve that capability. But this is a huge asset they're looking forward to getting inside of Afghanistan.
Well, it again, and you know, we have to make sure that when we leave that country, that country is prepared to hold and govern themselves. Just the situation in Iraq right now is that's certainly lessons learned the hard way, if you will. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions. Thank you for the A-29 mission, and if we can ever host you at Moody Air Force Base, be happy to have you down there. With that, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General, for your endurance and service. Tomorrow night at the State Armory in Hartford, there's going to be a send-off for the Connecticut Army National Guard 192nd Military Police Battalion, who are heading off to Afghanistan. And you know, first of all, they were given notice almost 60 days ago to the day that they were being sent over. And I realize this is not sort of in your lane in terms of, you know, making the decisions about, you know, reaching into Guard and Reserve units. You know, what I would say is that, frankly, there are folks who are kind of scratching their heads that if we're at a force level of about 10,000, you know, Guard and Reserves, there was, I think, an understanding and acceptance back during the surge days, you know, when we had hundreds of thousands of people over in the Middle East. You know, tapping into the Guards at this point, and frankly doing it with almost the bare notice required by law is something that, again, folks are struggling with. And first of all, I guess I would ask you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you were in front of those families tomorrow night, you know, what you would share with them. And I'm not asking you to, you know, explain the decision-making process, because I realize that happens somewhere else in terms of your command. But again, as their leader over in Afghanistan, you know, what would be your thoughts that you would share with the families?
Sure, thank you. And again, the Army, all of our service could not do what we do without our military families. So I'd first thank them for their sacrifice, for having to allow us to have that soldier continue to serve. I'd tell them that what they're getting ready to do, you know, two things, is a very, very important mission. Will mean a great deal to the Afghan people, but also provide for our own security back here. I'd ask them to watch out for each other and always take care of brothers and sisters on their left and right to make sure that force protection is always foremost in their mind. I'd ask them never to get complacent, but that they do have a very, very important job. You know, many times what I tell the soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines over there is that sometimes they're too close to it. They can't see some of these changes we talked about earlier, and they, you know, people serve for different reasons, but they do serve because they know that they're serving for the greater good. And when they come to Afghanistan, I tell them, you know, whatever you do, make that place better than when you found it. And I think I've seen over the years everybody continues to do that. They'll have an impact on whatever they do and whoever they touch. And again, sometimes it's an impact that they can't be able to put into words, but I would just tell you their service would be honored, and that they will feel good about what they've done after they leave there. I can't speak to the service provider piece of it, only that, you know, for many, many years, our National Guard, our U.S. Army Reserve, have played an important role both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and will continue as we move forward. And so I appreciate their service.
Great. Well, thank you, and I will share those thoughts. You know, frankly, I think as we've sort of wrestled with the drawdown and force reduction and sequestration and the Budget Control Act, you know, it sort of has reignited a little bit of the sort of tension about whether or not the Guard and Reserve really are on parity in terms of the rest of the forces. And again, the fact that they got this order to head over, you know, again, at a time when maybe the average person wouldn't think that kind of, you know, is consistent with the rest of the force level. It underscores to me the value that active duty still believes exists in terms of the Guard and Reserve units. And they have done yeoman's work during both conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you know, they deserve all the kudos and appreciation that we can possibly give them. So again, thank you for your comments. And again, I'll pass them along. I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and General Campbell, thank you and your staff for being here today. And I'm going to take a little different approach. I looked at your narrative and the comment by Senator Levin, who's now retired, and he says, I just cite these public opinion polls. Americans 65-70% think we haven't achieved anything, and then he's critical of the people that don't think we've achieved anything by saying at the end of it, and the people who are 7,000 miles away think we haven't. You know, well, I would say to the senator, it's those people back home that are paying the bills. They need to get something out of the tax dollars that they're paying. when we went into Afghanistan in 2001, the debt of our nation was $5.95 trillion. Today, it is over $18 trillion in debt. And you know from your brothers and sisters in the military what we're faced with budgets. All right, then I read in a blog from yesterday by Jason Ditz, D-I-T-Z, between casualties and desertion, Afghan military shrinking fast. The desertion problem is a long-standing one, with many Afghans signing up for the military, sticking around long enough to get their first paycheck, then bailing, and often taking their weapons with them as a sort of severance package. Then in The Guardian yesterday, Afghan officials sanction murder, torture, rape, says report. Now, I realize that this is from Human Watch, and we can have our views on that, whether it's a liberal group or a conservative group or whatever. That's fair, but they still write this, and apparently there's been no dispute, and I'll read just one paragraph. The report focuses on 8 commanders and officials across Afghanistan, some of them counted among the country's most powerful men and key allies for foreign troops. Some are accused of personally inflicting violence, others of having responsibility for militias or government forces that commit the crimes. I know some good things are happening. I don't question that at all. But Afghanistan has been proven in history as a Wild West. What my concern is that we've got 9 more years of a financial commitment and a military commitment, which might be limited in numbers, but there's still young men and women over there walking the roads to be shot at and have their legs blown off. I just wondered, because we in Congress are going to be grappling with sequestration this year. The chairman and ranking member, who are doing a great job, are very concerned about the military budget. And I think all of us here are as well. I know I am. I have Camp Lejeune down in my district and Cherry Point Marine Air Station. But I get to a point that I just wondered, not talking about you, sir, you're an outstanding, great military person, but will there ever be anyone in the diplomatic corps or the military that say, you know, we've done about all we can do? Some things are impossible. Yes, some people will benefit, but when I read reports like this, whether they be from the left or the right, Pat Buchanan is one of my biggest heroes. Ron Paul is one of my dearest friends. And I continue to see 9 more years of spending money that we don't have so we can decrease the number in our military, where it doesn't make any sense. I know you don't make the policy decisions. I understand that. But will there ever be someone who follows behind you and follows behind me that will be honest to the Congress and the American people who have to pay the bill, that we've done about as much as we can do?
Sir, thanks for the question. So I'd answer it like this. Again, you know, quite frankly, this is the world we live in, not maybe the world we want. And I think the complexity of the world we live in is a generational piece that's going to go on long after you and I are out of here. And we need to understand that and look at it as a generational issue and put strategies and policies into place that will get at this long term. So it's not going to change overnight, and I think we just have to change our mindset on where we're at. And I think the American people are well served by the great men and women who continue to raise their right hand and serve, knowing that they can go into harm's way, knowing that despite trying to do something bigger than themselves, that they're going to face going into a service that's going to have budget issues that's going to take away. And so I think this is a long-term issue we have to get at. But what I'm pleased about is that you mentioned all those different reports there, and there are challenges not only in Afghanistan but many places in the world. I do see Afghanistan as a place because of the significant investment in lives and in financial that we have provided to them, that this can be the bright spot. That this is, for lack of a better term, a strategic win. That will carry on in this part of the world that is a very complex, dangerous part. And for very little continued investment, we can make this a shining light of Central Asia and that part of the world. And I think, we got to start someplace. And Afghanistan is the good news story among all these other bad things that are coming out. And for every bad news report you just mentioned there, sir, there's probably 9 or 10 good news that don't get out because, as you know, good news doesn't sell. What I've had to do is I give President Ghani a good news storyboard that I collect each week. I have my commanders provide me a good news storyboard that talks about the good things that Afghans are doing in different areas. And when I meet with him, I say, Mr. President, Dr. Abdullah, here's some good news stories. You're not hearing about it in the news, but you need to know this is happening. And I give him 10 or 15 PowerPoint slides with pictures showing good news story in Afghanistan, and that word just doesn't get out because it doesn't sell. But believe me, sir, for every VBID suicide vest that went off in Kabul, there's 9 or 10 that are stopped. And so there are good news out there.
Gentlelady from Guam, Ms. Bordayo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Campbell, thank you for your challenging leadership in Afghanistan. I want to quote the 2015 National Security Strategy in saying, quote, "We must recognize that a smart national security strategy does not rely solely on military power. Indeed, in the long term, our efforts to work with other countries to counter the ideology and the root causes of violent extremists will be more important." I strongly support this approach, General. However, I'm also concerned that the persistence we have shown in Afghanistan and our presence there can have harmful effects on our long-term readiness. As we draw down to a force capable of protecting our security interests in the region, how will we capitalize and reutilize the equipment, and I know this was brought up earlier, that we currently have in country to protect the readiness of our total force? Specifically, can you comment on retrograde efforts as they are supported in the FY16 budget and what impact sequestration would have on this effort if sequestration is not repealed?
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for your visit last fall as well. Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers for the retrograde portion for FY16. I would tell you that we will continue to need the necessary resources, the financial piece, to bring back the retrograde that we have in Afghanistan so that we can put that back into the force here. Probably 80% of that now is for the Army. But the very best equipment that we have is in Afghanistan, so we need to continue to make sure we get that back, get it reset, and get that into the force. I do think that we're on glide slope to do that. We had some concerns, a year and a half ago, but as a vice and now as a commander on the ground, I don't have those same concerns, and we'll continue to get that back to the Army. Sequestration, from a different perspective, I think will impact the readiness of all of our services, and again, that's why I think all the service chiefs, the chairman, have come out, as you know, and said that it'd have a really, really bad impact if we go to sequestration on our readiness.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General. And my second question is, recently the First Lady of Afghanistan had said, "Women come to me and say, you have forgotten us." I am a strong champion of women's rights and wonder what can we do working with the Afghans and NATO to ensure women's rights are respected across the country as we continue to draw down our forces. How are we encouraging or working with the Afghan government to ensure greater inclusion of women in civic society? And a few years back, I traveled with then Speaker Leader Pelosi, and we visited many of the women leaders in Afghanistan, and they were very, very concerned about the future. So can you comment on that, General?
Thank you, ma'am. And we work very hard, both from a coalition perspective, but also President Ghani works very hard to make sure that he looks hard at how he's working on the gender issues and particularly the women piece here, both from a military perspective, security perspective, and getting women into the police and getting them into the Army. The money, $25 million, that Congress has approved for this, specifically pinpointed to work on these type of issues, is very, very helpful, and we're thankful of that support. But it will take time for the police and the Army, and the police are doing much better than the Army, quite frankly, on integrating women into the force, but we'll look very hard as we go through there. But some of the cultural differences they have make that a little bit tougher. But I think they're both committed from the MOI perspective, Minister of Interior, and I'll engage the Minister of Defense once we have a new Minister of Defense. I have engaged the current acting and the Chief of Army on this, and they're always looking at ways on how they can improve I want to say 24% of parliament is women. That's, I don't think we have that in our own Congress, so that's very good in Afghanistan. So President Ghani and the First Lady have really put a hard press on this throughout Afghanistan and reaching out as well. I do have a gender advisor from my force, from Australia actually, that focuses on a lot of different activities that are going on to see how we can do that much better. She engages with NATO and all of our NATO and partner forces as well to ensure we're doing everything we can to enrich this and continue to keep emphasis on it.
Well, thank you very much, General, for your comments, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, gentlelady. Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Campbell, thank you so much for your service and taking on the mission that you're taking on. And it's encouraging to see the positives that we don't often hear about. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it was a great move by Ghani to sign a BSA and a SOFA. That bodes well for all of us. And I think it was probably wise from where I sit for Ghani and Abdullah to come together as governance partners. And so my question to you is, what are you seeing as far as that relationship between the two of them and its effect on any national unity in Afghanistan?
Sure, thanks. That's a great question. I look at this every day, and I do think that both President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah gave up some to make sure that they can continue to have Afghanistan as a nation continue to move forward. They both did that after a long period there as they work together, and as I see both of them many times, both together and then separately, I think they complement each other as they work together. They both have great vision for where they want to take Afghanistan, and it really is the people around each of them, I think, that they have to continue to work through. And they've run into instances where they've had differences, but I think they work hard to make sure as they come out to the public that they have one voice as they move forward. That's not easy all the time, but I think they understand how important it is. So they work toward that both from a security perspective and then from a economic perspective. But again, I think they complement each other, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to engage with both of them quite a few times every week.
So, General, in that sense, has that carried over to the military in some ways, as far as unity and cohesion amongst the military and the morale within the military, the Afghan forces?
Sure, absolutely. As I said, he is Dr. Ghani, President Ghani, is a commander-in-chief. He said that up front. And so his interaction with all the security forces is completely different from where we were underneath President Karzai. Their morale, it's gone way up, just knowing that they have somebody that cares for their welfare, that's visited them at training sites, that's visited their wounded in hospitals, that's talked to them about changing the authorities for Corps commanders on what they can and can't do. He has video teleconferences several times since I've been with him with the senior leadership. He has a National Security Council meeting every week that he brings in the senior leadership from the police and the Army. So again, I think they are thankful that they do have a commander-in-chief that's taken not only their own welfare, but also their family's welfare as he looks at different ways to help out wounded warriors, those kind of things. So it is quite good.
And with that in mind, since they have not been in office very long, do you anticipate, the questions come up a couple times about the deserters. Do you anticipate that rate will slow down as a result, or hopefully anyway?
So how would I try to make that tie? And I think, President Ghani, what he's trying to do is put leadership in that can make a difference. So he's taken a hard look at all of his generals. He's retired on order of about 60 general officers here since he's been as the president. They hadn't had any retirements in the last 4 or 5 years underneath President Karzai. So in the last 4 months or so, they've had about 60 plus. So that's infusing new blood. He's looking hard at the people that he puts into those positions. He's trying to interview every one of his general officers or the people that he promotes to be general officer. He's trying to put them based on their merit, which is very good. And I think leadership is going to change the attrition piece. What happens on the attrition, I said part of it is combat casualties. That's only a small piece. The desertion, if you take a hard look at why people desert, and they have instituted an attrition working group in the Army that I have senior advisors that attend now. It went dormant for a while. We've instituted that back up to make sure we get after this issue. But when you take a hard look at it, it is leadership. It is, for instance, having a soldier that assigned to the 215th Corps in Helmand, and he's been there for 4 years, so all he knows is combat after combat after combat, and they haven't been able to get on a cyclic, so they have sort of a red, amber, green, so they can go through and they can take leave, they can have training, and then they can fight. And so they're just now starting to have that cyclic force generation process that gives them that ability. And once they get that into place, I really do think you'll see the desertion piece go way down. Part of it is you're assigned to the 215th, you get down there, you see no future about being rotated to another corps, and you're always going to be on there because their personnel management, how they do talent management is not right. They're moving toward that. But if you're in the 215th down in Helmand, but you live in Badakhshan way up north, you know, it takes you days to get back there, or you may never get back there. And once you do get back there and you interact with your family and they're out in the fields trying to harvest, you know, you may go past what your 20 days of leave would be, and then you're considered a deserter, and then you don't want to come back, although many do. So I think leadership is going to make the difference on the attrition piece, and I think President Ghani is a big part of that.
Well, those sound like logical things to address. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just one quick question. What percentage, you mentioned wounded warriors, what percentage of the medical care being given in theater right now is coming from American personnel, would you estimate, as opposed
for
to
the Afghans, sir? You mean
for the whole theater? You talk about, you know, the wounded warriors. Is it U.S. physicians, surgeons taking care of the wounded predominantly, or are the Afghan medical?
So for the you know, they have their own medical system. I've sat down with the Afghan Army Surgeon General and talked to him on one occasion how they can improve different areas of that. But no, they have regional hospitals. And we have some advisors at different places that continue to work through that, but they only come to a coalition facility like at Bagram if it's a very, very, you know, worst case that they can't handle, and that's been on very few instances since I've been there.
Thank you very much. And
thank you, sir.
We will have a chance to meet with you again in a classified setting, and I appreciate it. Yep.
Ms. Songas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General, for hanging in here. I've appreciated very much your knowledge and very nuanced testimony. I want to follow up on Congresswoman Bardallo's last comments. As a member of Congress, I've made 6 trips to Afghanistan and 4 with a delegation of women, generally 3 Republican congresswomen and 3 Democratic congresswomen. And our goal really has been twofold. It's been over Mother's Day, so to thank our women soldiers. Often we commiserate with them, know how hard it is to be away from home on Mother's Day, as it is for all of those who are serving. But we've also had the real opportunity to see the gains that have been made for women in Afghanistan. And while they're not as widespread as we would like, I think Kabul has been a prime beneficiary of them, but in other urban settings. But nevertheless, those gains have been real, and your report showed that in terms of health care, access to education, a whole access to work, although however limited. So as we're drawing down, our concern really is that those gains are not somehow traded away. And as you've talked about President Ghani's reaching out and referencing the Taliban in his inaugural speech, I can tell you that as we meet with women over there, those comments send chills through them because we know how terribly they suffered under the Taliban regime. And so I think our concern, our bipartisan concern, has become, you know, how do we protect the gains that have been made? And as we've talked today about some of the differences about Afghanistan and Iraq, it seems to me that one of them has really been the signing of the bilateral security agreement, and that it has set up a very different framework, and I think has given us leverage, a role in Afghanistan as it transitions to its next phase. So I'm curious, while the security situation is really your role, and many of these other gains have been investments that have come about through other parts of our presence there, how you see the United States' role using its ongoing relationship with the government to make sure that, let's just say, negotiations do go forward with the Taliban. How we make sure, how we use our leverage there, how you use
your leverage representing the United States to make sure that women's gains remain on the table and they are somehow not traded away, as others argue, for a path forward in which the Taliban are brought into the government?
Ma'am, thank you for your visits. Thank you for your question. Again, I think leadership has a big deal here to play. I think, again, the difference here is that President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah are very committed to this. It is written in their constitution, and so as they work with the Taliban, if there is reconciliation down the road, I think one of the key parameters there will be is that the Constitution will hold, and inside the Constitution it talks about respect of women's rights. So again, I think with the First Lady, with President Ghani, with Ambassador McKinley and his team at the embassy, with the 30, 40-plus ambassadors I interact with periodically, they all have this utmost in their mind. It comes up in different settings, different meetings I'm at. And so, you know, it's sort of a drumbeat that President Ghani, Dr. Abdullah, senior leadership, and then the other ministries continue to hear, and they understand how important it is that they abide by, you know, their constitution and where they want to go. So I think leadership will make a difference, and they understand that in my realm, in the security realm, what we've changed now is everything is conditions-based. And so we sign letters of commitment to provide finance, to provide fuel, on and on and on. And I think this is sort of the same way as we look forward in this area, that it can be conditions-based, and everything that we continue to do through different NGOs, we make conditions-based, and they abide by their constitution. I think the leadership can make that happen over there.
I can remember a hearing we had here where a woman who's a leader of one of the NGOs over there said the first indication that things are not going well for women will be the street, if you stop seeing women on the street. So that really does come back to the role of the Afghan National Police. Are you confident that they are up to the task? And if not, do you see how would we challenge them to do it better?
And the police have done much better on integrating women into their force. They're doing much better now in understanding how they have to deal with communities and understanding community policing. As we did a deep dive back in December on all the security incidents inside of Kabul, we talked about the high-profile attacks. One way of getting after that was having a police force that had community policing on their mind, understood what that meant. As was mentioned earlier by one of the members, President Ghani made a change on on the district commanders inside of Kabul. Made a change here. They've been talking about that for a while. He just did that. I think that will adjust. As I travel around the streets of Kabul, the streets are bustling. A lot of women are out and around, and so that indication there says that continues to build. Again, I think this will be a challenge that leadership and keeping a spotlight on this and having the international community make sure they understand how important it is. And if they don't continue to abide by this, then there's a conditionality where you take away something, whether it's financial and you know, they're very dependent upon the donor nations right now. So I think conditions have to go on this, and I know they're working very, very hard on this, and they're dedicated toward that. But there will be challenges as they move forward, and ma'am, it's going to take time. So you know, as I talk about within their Army, they have a goal, a very hard goal of getting 10% into their Army. They're less than 1% today, and they're trying to work toward that. But I look at my own Army, and after 239 years, we're at about 15%. You know, so it's going to take time, and it's harder based on the cultural differences they have there. But I think they are committed to working at this very hard.
Thank you, General. Thank you for your testimony.
General, I mentioned to you that I thought the questions would be better starting from the bottom or the more junior members, and I think the questioning has been excellent today. I think we've touched on a lot of topics. You've had a number of questions about ISIS or ISIL, and I realize that you're not here as a lawyer and that you haven't read and studied carefully the implications of what the President has proposed. And I heard you say that at this point ISIS is a nascent threat, although in Afghanistan, although one you are watching very carefully. But as we explore this AUMF that the President has requested for ISIS, thinking about how it would work for people like you, whether we're talking about Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, or whatever, one of the concerns is that it has more restrictions on ISIS than the current AUMF has on al-Qaeda. And some of these groups live side by side. And so to me, there's just a common sense concern here that if you've got two different standards to go after two different terrorist groups, how do you have the intelligence to know which is which? And then operationally, how do you have to have a lawyer by your side to make every single decision? I mean, isn't that, if it comes to be that way, and this is a big if, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot either, but operationally, would that not be a matter of concern?
Sure, thanks for the question. And you know, any commander on the ground would tell you he wants as much flexibility as he can get. And so any policy that provides commanders on the ground the flexibility to make decisions in a timely manner is something that I'll be in favor of. You are right, though, sir. The insurgents, and I can only speak for Afghanistan, but the insurgents inside of Afghanistan, they in many cases feed off of each other, and they're interrelated in many different ways. And you may have one that provides, finance, food, lodging to one that may provide weapons and secure routes for another. But some fight each other internally. But also, it is very, very tough as we take a hard look at it to separate some of these organizations. Where what I do have right now is the authorities to prosecute those that come after the coalition, and that's how I take a look at it. As I try to bend those, is that those that not by their status but by their conduct come after coalition forces.
The reason we're in Afghanistan to begin with is because that is the place from which a plot was launched that ultimately killed 3,000 Americans. And what can you tell us about your assessment of al-Qaeda's core ability to reconstitute itself were it not to be under constant pressure from us?
Sure, thanks again for that question. I do think we have to make sure we understand the threat and how the threat will continue to evolve. The continued pressure that we provide now with our very credible CT capability, the very best in the world, I believe has prevented another attack on the homeland. And I do believe if you don't have pressure, continued pressure on AQ, that it would be a matter of time that they would regenerate that capability.
Under the current drawdown plan, would your ability to gather intelligence for the CT mission be significantly downgraded in this calendar year?
So as I look at it, I'd much rather go into a classified session with you to discuss that piece.
I sure don't want to get in the details.
But sir, as you know, as you go anytime you go from one number to another, you have to make very, very tough decisions on where you balance that. And as I talked before, force protection is upmost in my mind. Yeah. ISR and other pieces that provide, they do provide continued force protection for me. And so, I look at it very hard, and I have to balance that. And so, those numbers, bottom line, so you got to make some very tough decisions on where you take that. And then, what I have to do, if I don't feel comfortable with that, I need to make sure that I come forward to my senior leadership and provide them, what I believe the risk to force is and what the risk to mission is.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that. Again, I'm just thinking from a common sense measure, if you are in fewer places around the country, you have fewer opportunities to gather intelligence, include on force protection, as you mentioned, and on counterterrorism mission as well, which is of concern to me. Just to clarify, and I think you answered this earlier, all of the high-value terrorists who were in our custody have now been turned over to Afghan custody, correct?
Sir, not all Afghan. They've been turned over to some other third countries as well, but I do not have any detainees. I do not have detention authority underneath my authorities after 1 January.
Okay, so they have all gone somewhere, but not all necessarily to the Afghans.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. last thought, I'm struck, we had, as you know, General Austin here yesterday, and I am struck by the number of members on this committee on both sides of the aisle who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan and feel very strongly that they do not want the sacrifice that has been made in Afghanistan to, I hate to say go to waste, but there is tremendous frustration at what's happened in Iraq, and you got a sense of that today. I know from your service and from those who serve under you, you share that determination to make sure that whether we're talking taxpayer dollars or American lives, that the sacrifice is upheld and honored, and that it is not wasted because of policy decisions. The only thing I'd request of you is, as you watch this situation in Afghanistan, probably closer than anybody else, if you believe that we are headed down the wrong path, i.e. headed down a path that we went down in Iraq, I know this committee expects and requests you to raise a flag to us as well as your chain of command and say, this is headed in the wrong path, because this committee obviously shares what I have no doubt is your commitment to make sure that all of that sacrifice these last 14 years results in a stable, relatively peaceful Afghanistan from which terrorists cannot again launch attacks against us. So I appreciate that, sir. You're welcome to say anything you want,
Sir,
you don't have to.
Sir, absolutely. I'm committed to that. That's what I owe my leadership and Congress here, to give you my best military advice as we move forward on that. And I'm absolutely committed to that. And sir, thank you for your leadership as well.
Great. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate answering all our questions today. And with that, the hearing stands adjourned.